Hey Kipsters, it's Mrs. Walsh. I am excited to jump back into our book today with you guys. We're reading Fantastic Mr. Fox. We're going to cover chapters 7, 8, and 9 today. If you haven't watched the previous chapters videos, go ahead and close out of this one and go back to find Miss Rondo and my videos from a couple of days ago to catch up. Before we jump into reading today, I want to review our thinking jobs and our genre of this story. The genre of the story is fiction, which means our thinking jobs are CPSL. This story reminds me of a lot of movies I've seen where there isn't just one huge problem, but there's lots of small problems throughout the story. So the main problem in this story is that the farmers are trying to kill Mr. Fox and his family, and Mr. Fox is trying to keep his family alive. So there have been a lot of attempts to solve problems throughout the story so far. The farmers are trying to get Mr. Fox, and Mr. Fox is trying to keep his family safe. As we keep reading today, we're going to see more smaller problems and smaller solutions that our characters are trying. We only have 2 new vocabulary words today that I want to review before we start. The first word is the word tender. If something is tender, it means it is easy to cut or chew. The second word is the word crater. Crater is a large bowl-shaped hole that's often caused by an exploration or digging. The crater picture you see here is one from the surface of a planet. So our 2 words today are tender and crater. Our focus for chapter 7 is similar to what the focus has been for previous chapters that we've read. Today you're listening and paying attention to see if you can figure out how the farmer's plan is changing. Let's start reading chapter 7. Chapter 7, We'll Never Let Him Go. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Bean switched off the motor of his tractor and climbed down from the driver's seat. Bunce did the same. Both men had had enough. They were tired and stiff from driving the tractors all day. They were also hungry. Slowly they walked over to the small fox's hole in the bottom of the huge crater. Bean's face was purple with rage. Bunce was cursing the fox with dirty words that cannot be printed. Bogus came waddling up. "Dang and blast that filthy, stinking fox," he said. "What the heck do we do now?" "I'll tell you what we don't do," Bean said. "We don't let him go." "We'll never let him go," Bunce declared. "Never, never, never," cried Bogus. "Did you hear that, Mr. Fox?" yelled Bean, bending low and shouting down the hole. "It's not over yet, Mr. Fox. We're not going home till we've strung you up dead as a dingbat." Whereupon the 3 men all shook hands with one another and swore a solemn oath that they would not go back to their farms until the fox was caught. "What's the next move?" asked Bunce, the pot-bellied dwarf. "We're sending you down the hole to fetch 'em up," said Bean. "Down you go, you miserable midget." "Not me," screamed Bunce, running away. Bean made a sickly smile. When he smiled, you saw his scarlet gums. You saw more gums than teeth. "Then there's only one thing to do," he said. "We starve him out. We camp here day and night watching the hole. He'll come out in the end. He'll have to." So Bogus and Bunce and Bean sent messages down to their farms, asking for tents, sleeping bags, and supper. So that was the end of chapter 7. Super short chapter, but still had a lot of good stuff in it. So right now I want you to pause the video and think about these 2 questions. How does chapter 7 end? And were they successful in getting Mr. Fox? Once you pause the video and thought about those 2 questions, you can press play and we'll jump into chapter 8. Before we jump into chapters 8 and 9, we're going to shift our focus for these 2 chapters. For these 2 chapters, we're going to focus on something called character traits. Character traits are words that we use to describe a character based on a character's actions and behaviors. So when we're getting ready to think about the Fox family, I want us to first think about the 3 pictures that you see on the screen. If I didn't know anything about the people and characters in these 3 pictures, what are some words you would use to describe them to me? Take a second and think about words that you would use to describe one of the pictures or all of the pictures. Now that you've practiced and thought about how we can describe characters using words, we're going to pay attention to the actions of the fox family today and come up with character traits to describe them. We're going to look for details in the text and illustrations that tell us more about them. The Foxes Begin to Starve is the title of Chapter 8. That evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill, one for Bogus, one for Bunce, and one for Bean. The tents surrounded Mr. Fox's hole, and the 3 farmers sat outside their tents eating their supper. Bogus had 3 boiled chickens smothered in dumplings. Bunce had 6 donuts filled with disgusting goose liver paste, and Bean had 2 gallons of cider. All 3 of them kept their guns beside them. Bogus picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" he shouted. "Lovely, tender chicken. Why don't you come up and get it?" The rich scent of chicken wafted down the tunnel to where the foxes were crouching. "Oh, Dad," said one of the small foxes, "couldn't we just sneak up and snatch it out of his hand?" "Don't you dare," said Mrs. Fox. "That's just what they want you to do." "But we're so hungry," they cried. "How long will it be till we get something to eat?" Their mother didn't answer them, nor did their father. There was no answer to give. As darkness fell, Bunce and Bean switched on the powerful headlamps of the 2 tractors and shone them onto the hole. "Now," said Bean, "we'll take it in turn to keep watch. 1 watches while 2 sleep, and so on all through the night." Bogus said, "What if the fox digs a hole right through the hill and comes out on the other side? You don't think of that one, did you?" "Of course I did," said Bean, pretending he had. "Go on then, tell us the answers," said Bogus. Bean picked something small and black out of his ear and flicked it away. "How many men have you got working on your farm?" he asked. 35, Bogus said. "I've got 36, Bunce said. "And I've got 37, Bean said. "That makes 108 men altogether. We must order them to surround the hill. Each man will have a gun and a flashlight. There will be no escape then for Mr. Fox." So the order went down to the farms, and that night 108 men formed a tight ring around the bottom of the hill. They were armed with sticks and guns and hatchets and pistols and all sorts of other horrible weapons. This made it quite impossible for a fox, or indeed for any other animal, to escape from the hill. The next day, the watching and waiting went on. Bogus and Bunce and Bean sat upon small stools, staring at the fox's hole. They didn't talk much. They just sat there with their guns on their laps. Every so often, Mr. Fox would creep a little closer towards the mouth of the tunnel and take a sniff. Then he would creep back again and say, "They're still there." "Are you quite sure?" Mrs. Fox would ask. "Positive," said Mr. Fox. "I can smell that man Bean a mile away. He stinks." Before we move on, I want you to pause the video and think about this question. How do you think the family of foxes feels knowing they can't leave their hole? Press pause and think about your answer, and then press play when you're ready to keep going. When I thought about this question, I thought about how I would feel if I were in the fox's position, and also what I already know the fox family has been through. I think the family of foxes probably feels defeated and discouraged because they thought that by digging lower and lower, they would get away from the farmers, but the farmers are still trying to get them. Let's keep reading and see what happens next. Remember, we're still reading and thinking about the character traits, those words that describe the characters in the story. Chapter 9, Mr. Fox has a plan. For 3 days and 3 nights, this waiting game went on. "How long can a fox go without food or water?" Bogus asked on the 3rd day. "Not much longer now," Bean told him. "He'll make a run for it soon. He'll have to." Bean was right. Down in the tunnel, the foxes were slowly but surely starving to death. "If only we could have just a tiny sip of water," said one of the small foxes. "Oh, Dad, can't you do something?" "Couldn't we make a dash for it, Dad? We'd have a little bit of a chance, wouldn't we?" "No chance at all," snapped Mrs. Fox. "I refuse to let you go up there and face those guns. I'd sooner you stay down here and die in peace." Mr. Fox had not spoken for a long time. He had been sitting quite still, his eyes closed, not even hearing what the others were saying. Mrs. Fox knew that he was trying desperately to think of a way out. And now, as she looked at him, she saw him stir himself and get slowly to his feet. He looked back at his wife. There was a little spark of excitement dancing in his eyes. "What is it, darling?" said Mrs. Fox quickly. "I've just had a bit of an idea," Mr. Fox said carefully. "What?" they cried. "Oh, Dad, what is it?" "Come on," said Mrs. Fox. "Tell us quickly." "Well," said Mr. Fox. Then he stopped and sighed and sadly shook his head. He sat down again. "It's no good," he said. "It won't work after all." "Why not, Dad?" "Because it means more digging, and we aren't any of us strong enough for that after 3 days and nights without food." "Yes, we are, Dad," cried the small foxes, jumping up and running to their father. "We can do it. You see if we can't. So can you." Mr. Fox looked at the 4 small foxes and he smiled. "What fine children I have," he thought. "They are starving to death and they haven't had a drink for 3 days, but they are still undefeated. I must not let them down." I suppose we could give it a try," he said. "Let's go, Dad. Tell us what you want us to do." Slowly, Mrs. Fox got to her feet. She was suffering more than any of them from the lack of food and water. She was very weak. "I am so sorry," she said, "but I don't think I am going to be much help." "You stay right where you are, my darling," said Mr. Fox. "We can handle this by ourselves." Here are the 2 questions I want you to think about from chapter 9. How does the Fox family respond to Mr. Fox's idea? And why do you think they were willing to keep digging? Pause the video and think about these 2 questions before you move on. The answers you've come up with about how the family responded and why you think they're willing to keep digging are going to help you on the next slide when we talk about the character traits for our characters. To wrap up our lesson today, I want you to use the comment boxes below this video to write sentences using the character traits for Mr. Fox and for Mrs. Fox. I did my example below for the small foxes to give you an idea of what your answers could sound like. My example was, the small foxes are determined, hardworking, caring, and brave. I know this because the small foxes support their father's ideas and continue digging even when they're exhausted. The character traits I chose were determined, hardworking, caring, and brave. I then had to think about my evidence from the text for why those character traits match the small foxes. I'm so glad you guys read along with me today. We will not have a video tomorrow because Friday is a holiday, but come back on Monday and we'll pick up with chapter 10 with Miss Rondo to see what these crazy foxes are up to and if their plan works. See you guys soon.